Ottawa's waking up under deep winter cold. Canadians are rethinking how tied we should be to the US. And over in Europe, shoppers are using their phones to avoid American brands. Later in the brief, the specific policy clock to watch in Canada-US trade and why it's suddenly driving decisions in Ottawa. It's Monday, February 9th. In Ottawa today, cloudy and cold, with a high around -10 degrees Celsius and a low near -23. A quick local sports note. At TD Place, the Ottawa 67s edged the Owen Sound attack 5-4. The story of that game was how thin the margin was. Owen Sound hit the crossbar in the final seconds, after a stretch of road games where they've been close but not quite getting the points. And around the region at the Winter Games, a Gatineau athlete, Antoine Cyr, finished 25th in the men's 20-kilometer skiathlon after hanging with the leaders early, then fading as the race wore on. A clean takeaway there. Canada has athletes in the mix, but the new skiathlon format at this distance is testing depth and pacing in a very unforgiving way. Now, let's widen the lens, because the stakes shift from local results to national strategy. Here's the main thread today. Canada is adjusting major economic policy in real time, with U.S. pressure in the background, and the next big decision point is already on the calendar. Prime Minister Mark Carney has overhauled Canada's auto strategy, and the headline move is this. Ottawa has scrapped the national electric vehicle sales mandate that would have pushed new car sales to 60% electric by 2030 and 100% by 2035. Instead, the government says it's moving to tougher greenhouse gas and fuel efficiency standards for model years 2027 through 2032, plus a credit system that rewards automakers for producing electric vehicles and allows credits to carry over. At the consumer level, purchase incentives are back, up to $5,000 for eligible EVs and up to $2,500 for eligible plug-in hybrids under $50,000. What's happening here isn't simply a climate policy tweak. It's also an industrial policy reset. Here's the key point. The government is trying to hold on to emissions reductions while giving the auto sector a rulebook it says is more flexible and less vulnerable to cross-border shocks. Why now? The immediate context is a more volatile Canada-US relationship under President Donald Trump. Carney is also drawing a bright line on China, saying Canada has no intention of pursuing a free trade agreement, while noting that under CUSMA, Canada has to notify partners before pursuing a deal with a non-market country. Trump publicly has threatened major tariffs, including talk of a 100% tariff if Canada makes a deal with China. So Ottawa is trying to do two things at once: keep investment and jobs in a North American auto supply chain and reduce the odds that trade becomes a blunt instrument against Canada. The risk here is that the new plan's climate impact is harder to measure. Reporting notes officials haven't precisely calculated total carbon reductions under the new regime yet, and critics argue removing the sales mandate could slow adoption. The government's counter is that it expects the standards and credits approach to still drive a large emissions cut over time, and Carney projects 75% of new car purchases will be electric by 2035, even without the mandate. Mid-brief orientation. Remember that trade clock I mentioned up top? This is where it comes in. The upcoming review of CUSMA is already looming over business decisions and government policy, because the agreement's future shapes what automakers build, where parts flow, and how exposed Canada is to sudden tariff threats. That review process is the next major forcing function in the Canada-US relationship. You're also hearing sharper language from Canadian political figures about how to respond to that uncertainty. Former Prime Minister Stephen Harper is arguing Canada needs to reduce economic dependence on the U.S. urgently, warning that assuming things will return to normal is a risky bet. Chrystia Freeland is emphasizing the danger of democracies drifting toward deeper reliance on China if the U.S.-led order weakens. And from the American side, Jake Sullivan, who served as President Biden's national security advisor, has said the post-Cold War era is over, but that a deep Canada-U.S. relationship still serves both countries, even through turbulence. All of that adds up to this. Ottawa is preparing for a longer period where trade, security, and industrial policy are less predictable. and where diversification is no longer an abstract talking point. A quick global signal that fits the same theme. Consumers themselves are also trying to diversify in their own way. In Denmark, app makers who help shoppers identify and avoid US-owned brands say downloads spiked during a late January flare-up tied to Trump's renewed attention on Greenland. One app, Matometer, says it saw about 30,000 downloads in 3 days at the height of that moment, and it uses image recognition to identify products and suggest European alternatives. It's a small story, but it's a useful indicator. When politics turns into uncertainty, even everyday shopping decisions can become a kind of pressure valve. Now, Act 3. What to watch next and where uncertainty remains. First, on autos, watch for the details in those 2027-2032 standards, how strict they are, how credits are earned, and how enforcement works. That's where the real behavioral change comes from, for manufacturers and buyers. Second, on Canada-US ties, keep your eye on the CUSMA review pathway. The big question isn't just whether there are tariffs, it's whether the rules of the relationship become more bilateral, more transactional, or less stable overall. And third, at the human scale, the Denmark app story is a reminder that public sentiment can move faster than policy. When trust drops, people look for tools, sometimes literally, to manage risk and values in daily life. That's the brief for Monday. Stay warm out there, and we'll keep tracking what changes and what holds.